The passage dropped without warning. One moment Zara Mel was standing on the museum's lower floor with the transit case wedged against her hip, and 3 minutes left before the security rotation. The next, the floor cracked open along a seam that had not been there a second before, and she fell. She did not fall far. 4 meters, maybe 5, enough to lose her breath and land hard on her side in a chamber she had never seen in any diagram. The transit case skidded 2 meters ahead of her and stopped against a carved wall. The floor above closed. The seam she had fallen through was seamless stone from below. She lay there for 3 seconds and listened to her heartbeat. Then she stood up, because lying on the floor was not useful, and picked up the transit case and looked at where she was. The chamber was large, not a maintenance corridor, not a service cavity. It was a room built to be entered, smooth-fitted stone walls running 8 meters on each side, the ceiling arched high enough that her headlamp did not find it. The walls were carved floor to arch in dense inscription work she had spent a year learning to read, which meant she was still in a Kethavari structure, just deeper than anyone knew the structure went. A single corridor opened from the far wall, and the air moving through it was neither dusty nor stale. She checked the transit case. The lock was intact. Inside, the object was where it had been. A scepter fragment, 40 centimeters of dark material, one end broken clean, surface carved with the same clothesline script as the walls. The museum's external catalog listed it as Artifact Lot 7, provenance uncertain, donor anonymous, no cultural claim filed. She had pulled the acquisition record herself twice, and both times the provenance chain ended at a sealed shipping document from 6 years ago. No source site. No excavation record, no permit. It did not belong in the museum. That was not a theory anymore. She clipped the headlamp to her jacket collar, adjusted its angle, and walked toward the corridor. The inscription on the corridor walls was older than the form she had studied, the same root system but earlier, more angular, the way the Kethavari script looked in the very oldest survey recoveries. She read as she walked, not stopping because stopping felt wrong here, her pace even, her eyes moving. The corridor's inscription was a record of function, what this passage was for, who had walked it when, for what purpose. A transit route. A permitted path between 2 parts of the structure that the builders had considered linked. She had been permitted then, or the floor had decided she was. The corridor ran straight for 60 meters, and then opened into a space that made her stop after all. She had studied Kethavari architecture for 3 years. She had excavated 2 sites with full permits and seen the recovered photographs of 5 others. She had read every field report the survey authority had declassified, and several it had not. She knew what Kethavari interiors looked like. Nothing she had read prepared her for this. The room was the size of a stadium, not a stadium-sized exaggeration, but a literal comparison she made with careful eyes, measuring the far wall, the ceiling vaults, the floor's open expanse. The floor was a single plane of the black basalt glass that the Kethavari reserved for their most significant constructions, and it ran unbroken to the far end where a structure rose from the floor to the ceiling. A throne, if throne was the right word for something 11 meters tall, built from the same Tier 1 material as the floor, its surface carved with inscription so dense it was nearly a solid field of script. It sat on a dais of 4 ascending steps. At its base, centered on the dais, was an absence. Not an empty space. An absence, a cavity in the dais surface, shaped and specific, sized for something 40 centimeters long with a broken end. She looked down at the transit case. She looked back at the absence. "Okay," she said quietly to no one, because there was no one. She crossed the floor. The room was not empty. She understood that when she was 20 meters in and the first of them moved. They stood in the room's lateral alcoves, 15 of them on each side, figures in Kethavari architectural stone, not sculptures, she realized, not representations. The way they stood was not the way carved figures stood. They were still, the specific stillness of something that could move and was choosing not to. She could see the texture of material that was neither stone nor metal, but the composite the Kethavari had used for their constructed guardians. The designation in the field reports she had always found peculiar because it implied something she had not believed possible. She kept walking, not because she was unafraid, but because she had already come this far, and the throne at the end of the room was the answer to a question she had been asking for 3 years. The guardians did not move. The inscriptions on the alcove walls near them did. She caught that in her peripheral vision, a faint pulse through the carved lines nearest the alcoves, the kind of low-level activity that the field reports described as passive recognition state. The structure knew she was here. The guardians knew she was here. They were simply allowing her to continue, which was a different thing from not noticing her. She reached the dais and climbed the 4 steps and stood before the throne. Up close, the inscription was extraordinary. Every band of text was a continuous record, one continuous sentence that wound from base to summit and back again, a document written in the structure itself. She read the nearest band at eye level and went still for a different reason. It was a charter. Not a memorial, not a dedication, not a list of victories or a king's genealogy. A charter, a founding document that described what this structure was for, who had authority over it, what obligations the builders accepted toward the things they had made, and what obligations the things they had made accepted in return. It was the most extraordinary document she had ever seen, and it was the document the field reports had called a myth, the Treaty of the Builders. The Kethavari covenant with their constructed entities. The document that, if it existed, changed everything the Survey Authority believed about the nature of Kethavari construction. It existed. She made herself breathe and looked down at the dais. The absence was shaped exactly for the scepter fragment. She could see that without measuring, the cavity's geometry was unmistakable, but the fragment she carried was 40 centimeters of broken material. The cavity was longer. Something else went with it, something that was missing. She looked at the throne. She read the inscription band directly above the dais, the lowest register, the line that would have been at standing eye level for someone placing something in the cavity below. It read, she translated carefully, making sure of each compound marker. The instrument of record is carried in 2 parts, as authority is carried in 2 parts, one the right to speak and one the right to be heard. Neither alone completes the function. Both together constitute the seal. She stood in front of an 11-meter Kethavari, thrown in a chamber larger than a stadium, and understood that she had half of something. The other half was here, had to be. The charter said both parts were kept in the seat of record, and the seat of record was this room. She walked the dais perimeter. The inscription ran unbroken. She read it at pace, not leisurely, she could do that, had trained herself to read moving because sights demanded movement, and she was halfway around when she found the alcove she had missed from the room's floor, a recess in the dais itself, low, carved in the step face she had not examined. Inside the recess, cradled in a fitted depression, was the other half. The same dark material, 40 centimeters of carved scepter shaft with one end broken clean, the break matching the break on the fragment in her transit case, the way 2 halves of a snapped branch match each other. She took it out. It was warm. Not ambient warm, warm the way the guardians had felt warm to look at, a contained and specific heat. She opened the transit case and took out the other fragment. She held them together, breaks aligned. The join was seamless. Not approximate, seamless, the way they had been one piece before someone had broken them, the way they remembered being whole. The warmth spread from the join point through both halves in a slow, even bloom, and the inscription on both surfaces lit. Not with fire, with the cold pale light she had only ever read about, the carving light of Kethavari active material, the thing the first surveyors had described, and the survey authority had classified as instrument error. It was not instrument error. She held the completed scepter in both hands and felt it settle, the way a well-balanced tool settles into a good grip, the way something built for a purpose feels when it is being held correctly. She turned and walked up the remaining steps and stood before the cavity in the dais. She placed the scepter in it. The fit was exact. She felt it lock not mechanically, not with a click or a clamp, but the way a key locks in the correct tumbler, a felt certainty, the sense of alignment completing. The light that had been moving through the scepter's inscription spread outward into the dais, into the throne above, into the floor. Not fast, steady, even, the pace of something that had been waiting and was not in a hurry now that it had what it needed. The inscription bands on the throne lit in sequence from base to summit, one after another, each band igniting as though red. Behind her in the alcoves, the guardians moved. She turned around. They were not advancing. They were changing posture, a collective shift, all 30 of them, from the contained stillness of readiness to something quieter and more deliberate. They turned to face the throne. They lowered their heads, not in the way of defeat, but in the way of acknowledgement. The way you inclined your head to something you had been waiting a long time to see. She had restored the charter seal. She understood that much. What happened now she did not know. The throne spoke. It did not produce sound the way speakers produced sound. The inscription band at eye level lit brighter than the others, and the words came as vibration through the dais floor and through the soles of her boots and through her bones, not loud, not commanding, just precise. She translated as it spoke. The instrument of record is restored. The keeper of the carried fragment is recognized. The obligation of the builders is renewed. Then, after a pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, the passage home is open. Carry the record forward. She stood on the dais of an 11-meter Kethavari throne in a sealed chamber that no survey had documented, and the 30 constructed guardians of the Treaty of the Builders faced her, heads lowered, and she was 16 years old and had come here trying to return a stolen artifact, and apparently she had done something considerably more significant than that. She exhaled slowly. She looked at the throne, at the dais, at the completed scepter locked in its cavity. She had carried half of it in a transit case through a museum after hours. The other half had been waiting here. The record that changed what the survey authority knew about Kethavari construction was carved into the walls of this room, and now, because the seal was restored, accessible. The wall to her left opened. Not breaking, not collapsing, opening, the way a door opens when it has somewhere to go. It led to a short rising passage, and at the end of the passage she could see the floor she had fallen through, now reachable. She went to the threshold. She stopped. She turned back to the room. The inscription was still lit. The guardians were still in their lowered posture. The scepter was locked in its cavity. All of it was exactly what the charter described, now that the seal was complete. A record, a covenant, a structure that had been waiting 6,000 years for someone to return what had been taken from it. She had a phone with a full charge, and a camera that could hold 12 hours of footage. She went back in and started recording. She documented every inscription band on every wall and every surface of the throne, reading them aloud as she filmed because her voice would carry the translation in real time, and she did not trust the audio alone to be sufficient. She was methodical. She had been trained to be methodical, and also she was terrified of missing something, so she was even more methodical than her training. She filmed the guardians. She filmed the scepter in its cavity. She filmed the dais from every angle and the charter inscription at close range and at distance. She filmed the alcove where the second fragment had been. It took 4 hours. When she came back up through the passage to the museum floor, it was 3 a.m., and the security rotation was long past, and she was going to have a great deal of explaining to do. She was fairly certain, carrying the most significant documentary record of Kethavari construction philosophy ever compiled, including the only complete text of a document the survey authority had classified as mythological, filmed on a phone by a 16-year-old who had gone in to return a stolen scepter, and come out with the charter that would require the survey authority to reclassify half of what it thought it knew about the builders. She sat down on the museum floor and pressed her back against the wall and laughed quietly in the dark for approximately 30 seconds. Then she pulled up the survey authority's emergency contact protocol and started typing. The record was restored. The passage was closed behind her. The obligation ran forward. She had the footage to prove it.